Hi! So today we're going to talk about ghostwriting, which is something that's definitely got a little bit more awareness lately, but there's still a lot of mystery surrounding it. So we're going to talk about all that today, how to get started with one, what do they do, what to expect, all of that good stuff. So first of all, what the heck is a ghostwriter? A ghostwriter is someone that you basically hire to write your pattern for you. Design a quilt top, you've got it exactly the way you want it, you'll send that to them and they will take that, do all the math for it, work out all the calculations, write the instructions, draw the figures, and mock up a pattern for you and return to you a draft that is basically ready for testing and tech editing. It's pretty polished at that point, it just needs some minor tweaks and some minor QCing, and then it's ready to be published. That's what a ghostwriter does. So basically, you'll take that pattern and you'll publish it under your own brand. Their name will be nowhere on it. There is this assumption of anonymity. They're not going to be associated with it at all. And that's true of almost all ghostwriters unless the designer themselves chooses to acknowledge that they've used a ghostwriter, which some people do, but it's not super common. And that might feel a little bit weird to be basically publishing somebody else's pattern as your own, but at the end of the day, it was your design to begin with. And this is actually a super common practice in the traditional publishing industry. So if you've ever read like a nonfiction book, memoir, autobiography, anything like that, or, you know, one of the books from one of these big business gurus like Amy Porterfield that's come out with a book, anything like that, 100,000% they've used a ghostwriter, because these people are not necessarily authors by trade. They're not trained authors. And so kind of writing a book themselves is going to be really, really challenging and take a long time. And so hiring a ghostwriter to kind of work with them and co-write this book just speeds the process up. At the end of the day, the ghostwriter is someone who does this professionally. And so they are able to kind of take that person's words and polish them up, turn it into a much, much better experience for the reader. And that's really why you hire them, right? It's someone who has a ton of experience that just kind of helps you bring this idea to life. It doesn't mean that it's not your idea. It doesn't mean it's not your words. It doesn't mean that, you know, you're taking somebody else's ideas at all. It's just someone who kind of comes alongside you and helps bring this thing to life in a much more polished professional manner. And that's exactly what it is in the quilting industry as well. You're the designer, you came up with the design, they just help you bring it to life. That's all it is to it. So with that, fit is really, really important. And I've talked about this being important with regards to tech editing, and I'll link that video below, but it's even more important for ghostwriting. And it's important because they're basically trying to write a pattern in your voice and your brand and your style. And not everybody's going to be able to do that if they're just too dissimilar from you and your brand. And so a couple of things to understand, they're not in your head. They're never going to be able to write a pattern exactly the way that you would, word for word, right? Nobody's that good. It doesn't matter how good of a fit it is. So there is an element of needing to kind of let go of control if you're going to work with a ghostwriter a little bit. You have to be okay with it not being exactly the way that you would write every single word. And that's fine, right? Like you just need to learn to let go of that a little bit if you're going to hire this out. It's just what it is. Often though, they've had a lot more experience in pattern writing than you have. Many of us are doing this as a profession. We're turning around 2 to 3 patterns a week sometimes. You just rack up a lot more experience doing that than just kind of an individual pattern designer or writer who's just kind of writing and publishing under one brand. And that's actually a good thing. You want someone that has experience. That's why you hire this out, is so that you find somebody who's got more experience in it than you do and can help you polish kind of your design and your work to make a better experience for your customers. And so they might have some suggestions about kind of formatting and techniques and things like that that you want to take into account, even though that might not be the way that you would do it if you were kind of left to your own devices. And so you need, again, to be able to let go a little bit and defer to them on some of these things in order to be able to get the best product and also to have the best experience working with them. So if you're not prepared to do that, if you're not prepared to kind of let go of control a little bit, hiring a ghostwriter might not be the right thing for you right now. It's just what it is. Okay, so before we jump into like how this process works and what to expect, let's talk about some alternatives to ghostwriting, because I like to say it's on a scale, right? So you've got a spectrum, one end of it's tech editing, the other end of it's ghostwriting. You don't have to be all one or the other. There's a lot of things in between there. And if you're not prepared to kind of let go of that control and let your ghostwriter just kind of do their thing, maybe something in the middle of the spectrum is a little bit of a better option for you. So let's talk about it. So some of those options are, you could have your ghostwriter basically just do figures for you. So if you're not very good at illustrating, you can just kind of send them all of the written instructions of your pattern and have them illustrate it and generate those figure diagrams for you. And then all you have to do is basically take those and drop them into your pattern. You're going to do the layout on your pattern. You can tweak the formatting a little bit, right? Get it just the way you want it, but you don't have that burden of trying to do all of those figure illustrations. That's totally an option. Another option is to have a ghostwriter do page layout for you. So basically you write all of the instructions, do all of the illustrations, get all of the bones together for your pattern, and then you hand it to them to do kind of professional page layout and formatting for you. Totally a great option. If you like doing the formatting and that's the easy part for you, the hard part is actually writing and illustrating the thing, you could also just have your ghostwriter do that part of it, right? So write out all of the steps in just like a Word document, Google Docs, something like that. Do all the illustrations, they'll drop them in and kind of get the skeleton ready for you. And then all you have to do is just drop that into whatever pattern writing software you're using, whether that's InDesign or Affinity Publisher, anything like that. And you'll just kind of copy and paste all of that stuff in there and get it tweaked to exactly the way that you want it. The great option about all of these things is that you have the ability to kind of tweak the language so that it sounds exactly like you get it just the way you want it. And then they're just kind of assisting you with these other things. So you're kind of splitting it half and half. The good thing about this is that it's usually cheaper because they're not doing kind of the same scale of project as a full ghostwrite would be. But it's also going to take, some more input from you. It's not just going to be something that you can just hand off and it comes back to you perfectly all ready to go. So those are kind of like some of the options available if you're not ready for like a complete ghostwrite. There's also many, many other kind of different things along that spectrum. So, anything that you can think of, reach out, talk to a ghostwriter about that. Usually they're pretty accommodating. There's lots of things in the middle there, and we're usually happy to work with you on this thing. So how do you know if you're ready to go hire a ghostwriter? Aside from like being prepared to actually let go of control of the process, here are some of the other indicators that might be a good indicator that it's time for you to start hiring this out. So one is like, you just hate pattern writing, right? That's a really great indicator that, you can hire these things out, but you want to have a little bit more than that. So one of them is knowing that pattern writing is the holdup for you. So if you could just release a few more patterns a year, or just, free up 6 or 8 hours once a month to work on other projects and kind of offload this part of the pattern writing process, and that's going to allow you to scale your business more, definitely hire it out, right? Like that's why ghostwriters exist, is to help you kind of along in that process. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you have enough income and revenue to kind of sustain the cost of ghostwriting. On average, depending on kind of the complexity of the pattern, you should expect $200 to $300 a pattern. So it's not cheap at all. It's not as much as you might expect it to be, but it is certainly not cheap. And so you need to make sure that you've kind of got your business established enough that you're going to have revenue coming in from that pattern and kind of get the return on investment that you're going to need in order to pay for that ghostwriting service on the front end. So if you don't have that, if you're just getting started, maybe hiring a ghostwriter isn't quite the best option yet. A lot of times the clients that I see coming through are typically people that have had like an existing membership or business, and now they're wanting to add patterns into it, and they know they can ROI that investment pretty easily. I also see a lot of quilt shop owners doing this, right? They've had a quilt shop for years, selling other people's patterns, kitting other people's patterns, and with that, they kind of see all of these designs and things that would be cool to do with these fabric lines, and they're ready to start putting out their own designs, but don't have the time to actually invest in learning how to write their own patterns. And so they'll just kind of offload it to a ghostwriter, and that's totally fine. These are people that don't necessarily have their own pattern format and template established already, and that's totally fine. A ghostwriter can do that for you. Kind of third bucket of clients that I see are people that have had pattern writing businesses for a while, and they're just growing to the point where they don't have the time to write these things themselves, and so they're ready to hire that out, and maybe that's part of the process that they just don't love anyways. But again, that is the person that really needs to make sure that they're ready to let go of control, because they've kind of got an existing style and brand already. And that can be really hard to kind of let go of and come to terms with that when you're working with a ghostwriter who is not going to write everything exactly the way you do, because they're not in your head. So you've decided you're ready to hire out your pattern writing to a ghostwriter. Let's talk about what that process looks like. So the first things first, if you reach out to a ghostwriter, they're probably going to want to get a contract in place with you. Tech editing, that might happen. Some do, some don't. Ghostwriting, it probably will almost always happen, just because these are much, much bigger charges. And so kind of that amount of money doing all of that work up front and not getting paid for it till the end. You want to make sure that you've got a contract in place to kind of protect everything. And also just kind of getting all the ground rules laid out at the beginning just regulates that process and makes it a much better experience for everybody involved. Cost-wise, like I said, it'll be usually $200 to $300 a pattern. That's for a pattern that's got a block base to it, 1 or 2 blocks associated with it. Couple of different sizes, maybe that's going to run you like $200 to $300. If it's just one block and it's one size, maybe it's closer to like the $100, $150 mark. If it's something like a block of the month pattern where you've got like 15 different blocks and 12 different subparts to this pattern meant to be doled out over the course of a year, those can explode pretty quickly. It just depends on the complexity and how many blocks you have, but I've seen those run upwards of $1,000 sometimes because it is just a lot of figures and diagrams that have to go into something like that. And so typically the clients that have engaged me on those kinds of projects are like shop owners where they've got this really big customer base already and they know they can kit this thing and sell block of the month subscriptions for the entire year and generate revenue from it. And so it makes sense. But it can really vary, so just be aware of that. As far as kind of the charging process goes, different ghostwriters are going to work differently. They could charge by project or by the hour, it just depends. If it's by the project, you'll probably agree on the total price of the project on the front end, regardless of everything involved into it. You'll agree on that price through an estimate at the beginning, and then that's what you pay at the end, no matter how it turns out. If it's by the hour, then they're not going to know the exact cost for you until they've actually finished the project. They should be able to get you an estimate that's fairly close at the beginning, but it just depends on the ghostwriter. And sometimes these projects have a tendency to kind of scope creep a little bit. So, it starts off being one thing and then by the end, there's some things that have been added and modifications that have been made. And so if that happens, right, every time you make a modification, once it's already in process, it's going to shift the scope a little bit and also the cost. And so just be aware of that as you're going, but you will be billed for the final cost at the end once they've actually tracked all of their time. As far as what you need to provide when you get started, obviously you've got to have a finished design. But you're also going to need, for the first project at least, to provide your branding, your logo, any kinds of fonts, colors, anything that's part of your brand and formatting, you'll need to provide that to them. If the fonts and design elements that you're using are not kind of freely available online, you're going to need to be able to provide those. So maybe that's a font file or a logo file, source files, things like that. Be prepared to have those on hand to send to your ghostwriter. If you have written patterns before, so you've been writing your own patterns and now you're just hiring that work out, you also should be prepared to send an example pattern or two. And even better than just kind of the PDF copies of those are the actual source files. So, if that's InDesign that you've been writing in, you want to send the InDesign source file to them so that they have all the formatting and template for how you write your patterns already. That will save them a bunch of time, which means saved cost for you. If you don't have it, they're going to have to generate it, and it just means it's going to add like an hour and a half to your total pattern charge. But having kind of those source files available are really helpful. Different ghostwriters are going to use different softwares, so that's definitely something you should discuss at the beginning. If you've been writing patterns and you're used to only writing in one specific program, so say like Microsoft Publisher or Affinity Publisher or something like that, it's probably not best to work with a ghostwriter who only works in one particular software, like Adobe products, because that means that they're going to provide you those source files and you may not even be able to open them. And that's not really a great situation to be in. You want to be able to edit those files because once the project is closed, you really shouldn't be going back to that ghostwriter to have them open it 2-3 more times throughout the rest of the year. That's not really professional. And it's also going to frustrate your ghostwriter a lot, speaking from experience. Once the project's kind of paid and closed, we don't really want to be going back and reopening those invoices ad nauseum. So if you can't edit it yourself, you need to make sure that you're comfortable with maybe some minor errors and the thing not being completely perfect, which it's never going to be anyways. But, if you find a small typo 6 months down the line, that is not reason to go get that pattern reopened by your ghostwriter. So once you provide all of that information to them, they will then go through and work out all the math for your pattern. At that point, they may come back to you and say, hey, this block was supposed to be 10 inches. It actually needs to be 12 inches so that we were cutting in whole increments of 1/4 inch. Something along those lines, maybe make some adjusts and tweaks just to make the pattern more followable for your customer, that's a good thing, right? You want them doing that. But that's why I always say the math is never completely set until your ghostwriters had a chance to go through it and just verify that it's all going to work. And so they might come back with a couple of those questions and just kind of work out minor details like that, but that shouldn't change the design really at all unless there was like a major issue with the way that you originally had it constructed. After that, once everything's confirmed, they're going to go through and draft the whole pattern. So that means writing all the instructions, before you begin section, cover, all of it. They're going to illustrate it completely. And then once they've got it to, a state where they're pretty happy with it, they'll send you a draft back. At that point, it is up to you to kind of do some QC checks on it. I always recommend to my clients that they hire a professional tech editor, have it tech edited. That's because even though I'm a tech editor, I can't tech edit my own stuff. It's just not possible. You quit seeing your mistakes if you're writing your own words. And so, that's my recommendation. You should hire a tech editor, but that's on you. You can either choose to do it or not. I would say it's like 50-50. Some clients do, some clients don't. It just depends on how comfortable they are kind of reading through and doing the QC process themselves, or maybe they're working with testers and they're happy to just kind of let their testers be that person instead. Whatever you want to do, that's totally fine, but the recommendation is that you should have it tech edited just to kind of catch any problems or errors. So once you receive that draft, you'll have, anywhere between a couple of weeks to a month to basically go through and make any requested edits that you see fit. So this is your chance to kind of get it all on the paper. You should go through the entire thing and make sure that you've identified everything that you want changed. Okay? Don't go through it and find a couple things, send that to your tech editor, have them, adjust it and send you back a new draft, and then find a few more things and just kind of go back and forth 15 times. That doesn't work. They're going to get very frustrated with you because it just eats up a lot of their time. So make sure that you go through it thoroughly, find everything that you want changed or adjusted, anything you have questions about, all of that good stuff, mark it up, send it back to them, and then they'll go through and make those edits and send you back a new copy. At that point, it should just be minor edits, a couple of small things, any edits to any new information that was added based on what was requested previously. And then at that point, if everything looks good, you'll accept it. They'll invoice you, you'll pay the invoice, and then they'll provide all of their source files to you. Everything basically associated with your pattern, so that if you have to reopen this pattern later to make a change or you want to update it, you have the ability to do that. You do not need to contact your ghostwriter to have them do it. And then once that invoice is paid, the project's closed, it's done. So if in 6 months you go, hey, I'd like to tweak this design a little bit, and you go back to your ghostwriter, it is basically a new project at that point, right? So their lead times, their turnaround times, all of those things that apply to a brand new project is going to apply to that project. Please don't come back to them and expect, a 4-day turnaround on this little tweak right before you launch your pattern because you didn't think of it at the time when you had that period to edit it. So let's talk about like some do's and don'ts of working with a ghostwriter smoothly, because this is really more of a partnership than it is kind of a client hiring a service provider or hiring someone to do work for them. It's really co-writing patterns together. So like I said at the beginning, your ghostwriter is an expert. They've written frequently way more patterns than you ever will, and they've got a lot of experience, and that should be respected. So if they're making a suggestion to you, it comes from experience, and you should take that seriously instead of just assuming that you know better all the time. The other thing to remember is that this is a professional interaction. So they're going to come with you and treat you like a client, treat you like a professional, behave and provide you with information in a very organized manner as they would to kind of provide you with a really good client experience. And so you kind of owe it to them to also behave in that way, right? This is a professional interaction. So what that means is making sure that you have a design finalized, right? Don't come to them with a design that you're iffy on and have them start writing it, and then halfway through the process or after you've received that first draft go, oh no, I'm changing this entire design. That's basically a pattern rewrite at that point, right? They've written one pattern already. You've now tweaked the design. That's changed cutting instructions, assembly instructions, all kinds of things, and now they've got to go back and rewrite all of that. That's 2 patterns, and you should expect the charge to increase to basically be 2 patterns worth of charges, right? Charges can double if you're doing that. So before you engage a ghostwriter, really make sure that you are settled on that design and you're done tweaking it. And even if, 3 weeks later when you receive the first draft, you're like, well, maybe I could do that piece a little bit differently. No, you're not doing it. You've already initiated the pattern, right? You're done. That's it, right? Just make a rule for yourself that when you got to the point where you were happy enough to send it to a ghostwriter, you're not changing it after that point, and don't do that to your ghostwriter because it's really frustrating to write a pattern, get it all looking really great, put all of this effort into it and then have a client turn around to you and go, okay, throw half of this out, we're changing it. Just do it again, right? And yeah, you get paid for it, fair enough, right? But it's still a really frustrating experience for the ghostwriter, and I have dropped clients for that reason before, because I don't like doing it. It's really frustrating for me. It's really disruptive to kind of my work schedule as well. Makes it really difficult for me to kind of give estimates to other clients that I'm working with on turnaround times and expected delivery dates. The kind of last thing I'll say is kind of like what I talked about before, and that is making sure that you kind of put everything on the table with that first draft edit. So that's kind of your option to change anything you want about the pattern, get it all down on paper. Those are where any major changes should happen. After you've returned that first draft, that first round of edits, there should be no major changes after that point. And you should really only be going for like one more round of edits after that for really minor tweaks on any of the major changes that happened in the first round. After that, that's it, right? You don't get a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round of edits. And yes, I've done that with clients before. It's really frustrating because these things will drag on for 3 months sometimes, right? And so I've put in hours of work on this pattern that I don't get paid for until we finalize the thing. And also, what I have seen with a lot of clients is once we get past like that third round of edits, they're not productive anymore. I've literally seen clients that will suggest one change in one round of edits and then suggest that change get made back to the original in the following round of edits, which is just like, it just gets ridiculous, right? And so what that tells me is that I'm working with someone who doesn't really know what they want and isn't prepared to defer to the ghostwriter as the expert. And like I said, it just kind of comes back to that whole, are you actually ready to work with a ghostwriter or not? I personally don't like working with clients like that. It's very frustrating for me, and it's not productive for either one of us because they end up with a bad experience, and as do I. It just becomes really frustrating for everyone. So that point, I will generally kind of have a conversation with the client and be like, hey, we're not a great fit. Like it's time to think about doing this a different way. Like maybe we look at one of these options where I'm doing kind of ghostwriting light, right? Something in the middle of the spectrum like we talked about. Or maybe it's just time for them to find somebody else, but like this isn't working. And it's not on either one of us, right? Like it's not a reflection of either party. It's just this isn't working. It's time to move on to something else so that we can both get what we need out of this process. And that's all there is to it. All right, that's all I've got for Tech Tip Tuesday. I hope you found that helpful. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you next week for Tech Tip Tuesday. See ya.